it's me, John, here at Underhill Creations and Casting Solutions. I'm in the shop today. It's a little cold, so I thought, perfect day to do a color cast. Now, you're probably thinking that's a little strange because it's cold. Here's my theory. We'll be using Alumilite White, which has a 2-minute working time. And as long as the shop's a little cold, the resin's stored down here, it's going to be cold, so we can stretch that working time a little bit further and hopefully get some great character. Now, the great thing about color casting is, once you learn the fundamentals of it, you'll use that as you move forward into embedded objects. So here's how I do a basic color cast. Alright, so when we decide to get going on this, the first thing we have to figure out is what style of blank do we want to make. We have the opportunity to make a block or a bowl cast, or we can make a vertical cast. As you can see, the characteristics are different in each pour, and it's all by the way the resin is poured, manipulated. As you learn more and as we make more videos, I will show you other ways to get different characteristics in your resin cast. But for now, we're going to start with the basic, which is the bowl mold. And this is the easiest, I feel, to get characteristic in a resin cast when you're first starting out. Alright, so here I've gathered everything that we need. I've got my mold, I've got my colored cups, I've got my measuring cups, my mixing container, the colors I want, my mold release scale, obviously the resin, and the drill that we're going to use to mix it. So the first thing I want to do, though, is because the shop is cold today, like I said, it's beneficial for the Alumilite White because it's only got a 2-minute working time, but if it's colder, we can stretch that a little bit. And I'll be honest with you, on a hot summer day, if my shop is a little warm, I will put these in the refrigerator. I have a shop refrigerator. I won't put it near food, but I will put it in the shop refrigerator on a shelf by itself. And I will cool these down to, say, 50-something degrees, and that will give me a little more working time. But I don't store them in there all the time. I only put it in there, say, a couple hours before I'm going to start pouring, and that will just be enough to give me those extra few seconds to get everything poured and in the pressure pot. So because the molds are cold, because the shop is cold, we want to make sure that our molds are warm when we start. So what I have here, and this is something I use a lot, it's my shop light. And I have a 125 watt heating light bulb in here. I picked this up at the local Farm Mart. They use them in a lot of like chicken coops and things like that when they're hatching eggs, small hatchlings and whatnot to keep them warm. And you won't get this out of an LED light bulb, so you can't find incandescent bulbs very often. If you do, pick up one or two. They're great for putting off a little heat. And what I'll do is I'll clamp this to the lid of my pressure pot, and I'll just let that shine down on my molds for, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes while I'm getting everything else together, and this will warm my mold. If you don't do this, when you cast in these molds, the resin will pull away from the sides and you won't actually get a full cavity mold. You'll get corners that are a little thinner and rolled in, and you'll know what I mean the first time you do it. So we're going to warm this mold up. In the meantime, I'm going to take some of my utensils, like my pouring cups, and I'm going to bend a spout in them. And this allows me to control the flow a little more out of these pointed spouts. I can flex this cup, so if I want a fine stream, I can squeeze on this a little bit and get my fine stream. In other words, everything's rolling out of this, and I can't control how much resin comes out of these cups without that. So I like to bend a little spout in there. It just gives me a little more control over what I'm casting. So I'll wait for these to warm up while I get everything else ready, and then we'll begin. Alright, so we've got our mold warmed up, and the walls are about 80 degrees. The bottom's obviously going to be more because the light was shining down in it. But now we're going to set that aside just for a couple of minutes while we measure up our resin. In the process, we're going to shake up our mold release. Now this is the urethane mold release. Because I'm using urethane resin, I'm just going to lightly mist that. I don't do it every time, but I haven't cast with this mold in a while, so I'm going to put some in there, and I'm going to set that aside to let it dry. So while that's drying, I'm going to take my cups, and I'm going to measure side A and side B. So I always write on my cups, A, I'm using white resin, and this is B, white resin. Because after one pour, I might want to come back and do a second or a third, and I don't want to accidentally pour the opposite side in the cup I previously used, because that will start a reaction within the resin. So I always mark my cups. So now I have my postal scale here I'm going to turn on. And I know I want 300 grams of A and B. That mold holds roughly, I think, 275 to 280, but I always go just a little bit more in case the tank isn't setting flat, or maybe my floor has a little pitch to it. That way, if resin rolls to one side of the mold, I still have a deep enough mold, a deep enough cast to get what I need out of it. So I've got 300 of A and B. As you can tell, B is much thinner. When you're working with white resin, B is the thin side, A is the thick side. So sometimes that presents challenges with trying to get it mixed, especially if you do it by hand, but we're not going to do it by hand. So before I get started in mixing anything, because again, once A and B meet, our working time begins, and we only have about 2 minutes to get them colored, poured, and put in the tank. I want to make sure everything is open. So I'm going to open all my containers here. My dyes, I'm using black. The blank we're going to make is going to be, the primary colors, black, orange, and white. Now because the Lumelite white already cures white, I don't have to add anything to it. I could add white if I want, but I'm okay with the white we're going to get out of it as it naturally cures. But the orange and this dye is a little dark, so I want to brighten it up, so I'm going to add a little bit of yellow dye to it. And as you get casting, you'll see some of the dye colors, especially green. Green is another one. It comes out a little darker than what I like, so I like to add some yellow to that as well. That gives me a little better, a little brighter color that I'm looking for. And you'll learn that as you experiment with them. So, all right, so I'm checking to make sure that I have enough juice in my drill, and I do. My compressor is plugged in and ready to go, so I don't have to wait for that. Let's stop just for a second. Like I told you before, B in this one is the thin side. It's important to know that because you want to start with that resin in the bowl. If I had A in the bowl first and poured B into it, it would be harder to get the thick resin away from the sides and mix all that in. So it speeds things up a little bit, and when you're casting with white resin, a little bit of time makes a huge difference. So I want to always stir the thickest resin side into the thinnest. And we can scrape the cup a little bit. There we go. Now we're good to go. Shop rag's always good to have on hand. Now you see when I first start mixing this, it clouds up right away. The more I get it properly mixed, the clearer it will be, and then you'll know you have it mixed thoroughly. You can also look in there and see a little bit of a separation in film. And that film will let you know that you need to mix it more. I always tilt the container, work it back and forth, move the drill bit around different angles. What I'm working with is a spade bit. I took a 1-inch spade bit and I broke the tip off, and then I put the rest on a belt sander and I sanded all my edges round. That way, there's no sharp edges, no points, anything to poke through a cup. So if I were mixing in these cups, I wouldn't break through them. And the nice thing about a drill bit is, if you forget to wipe it off at some time, and it builds up, you just drop it in acetone and it'll clean it right up. All right, so we can check the temperature now, and we're at 61 degrees. Because the shop today is about 55 degrees, our resin is still cold. So this gives me plenty of time to set my cups out here, and you see I've got my spouts in them. And now I can divide the ratios. The ratio will also determine the characteristics. So we could mix the same 3 colors but change the ratio 4 or 5 times and get totally different blanks. So in this case, we're going to do them evenly. And if it's not exact, it's not a big deal because we have more resin than we really need. There we go. That looks pretty good. So I already know this first cup is my white. So I'm not going to do anything to it because white resin cures white. Now we're at 73 degrees. So now I can mix my colors. So I'm going to start out here with the yellow. And I always use a bamboo skewer. This way, if I'm pouring it in there, I might get too much. But this way I can grab a skewer and control how much I get in there. Because I can always add more, but I can't take it back, right? Now we're going to take the orange. Now if you add too much dye, and you don't get it mixed properly, what's going to happen is it's going to sit in that resin, and when you cut through it, it's going to bleed. And you're going to get a big pocket of uncured dye in there that you're not going to appreciate. It's going to mess everything up. So another thing you'll get with experience, white resin is going to lighten your color. So you can see what you have right now, but as that cures, that color is going to get more, it's going to get solid, it's going to get opaque. It's transparent now, but as the white comes through, it's going to lighten your colors. So sometimes it's hard to tell if you have enough dye, and you may have to play around with it a little bit. Something else to mention is your resins or your dyes will get thick in the cold or with age, and I've had this black for a little while, a few months. So it's got a little thick on me. So I may have to do that a couple times, because what I don't want is, I don't want my black to look gray as the white bleeds through. So I want to add enough black. And I don't mix it all the way, I just want to get it off my skewer. And then what I'll do is go at it with the drill. So we'll set this out of the way. Come in here, I'm going to start with the light color first. You don't have to mix a lot, just enough. Now I don't have to worry about wiping it off with the black. If you have plenty of time you can, but in a pinch you don't have to, because the black is dark enough, it will drown out any residual color on there. So we're at 110. Perfect time to pour. Sorry, I keep bumping the camera stand. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with a little bit of white. Pour it in there. I like to go through each color at least 2, maybe 3 times. And as you can tell, I'm changing the direction that I pour every time. That way I get different characteristics in the colors, and each color gets through the blank, through the block. So its presence is always in that blank somewhere, right? It might not be exactly where you poured it, because resin's going to move itself around. But as you layer it up, you're going to see that your colors are going to be throughout the entire blank. So I can hold high and get more depth. I can hold lower. I can squeeze a cup, get thinner streams. But when it comes down to it, that's what you have. You're not going to know how it turned out until you put it in the tank and let it cure. So let's do that. All right, so when we close this, we just want to hand tighten it. Just enough to compress those seals. Then we close the valve. Make sure the valve is always closed. You don't want to blow resin out of your mold the minute you put the air on it. Put your air tank on it, or your air hose on it, and then lightly open it. And I'm going to only open it maybe a half, and I'm going to inflate it to about 40 pounds. And then I shut it off and remove my air hose. Now I'm going to let that sit for about 15 minutes, and then we'll see what we get. Alright, so it's been about 25 minutes. In the summertime, I'd probably wait 15 minutes and take the mold out, so that way I could demold it and start with the next. But in the wintertime, it's a little colder, so I thought I'd give it a little extra time. Now with this type of cast, you don't have to bleed slowly. We can just open it up and let the air out. And then we're going to loosen these. I don't loosen all of the entire way. I don't want to add stress, kind of like a lug nut. You don't want to add stress to any one, so I usually loosen them all at least one turn and then go side to side so that there's no damage or stress being put on these metal threads. The blade comes out, and now this is what you have. And now we have to demold this from our block. You can either take the screws out and do that, or a lot of times just turn it over and it'll pop right out because we use mold release. Let's get a closer look at this. All right, so here's what we have. We popped it out of the mold. Normally I would set this aside and just let it finish curing. Internal heat is still a little warm. I don't normally cut these up until a day later, but today, for the sake of the video, I'm going to take this to the bandsaw and we'll cut it. We'll see what we have inside because the top never reflects what's going on inside the blank. All right, so here's our blanks, right? They look nothing inside like they did on the top. I cut mine to 7/8. That way it gives me enough room to turn a larger pen if I want. But as you can see, our character in these blanks are larger color globs, so to speak. If I wanted something a little finer, I can squeeze the cup a little more and restrict the amount of flow on the tip. With these, this is pretty much an average characteristic in a pen blank where we see 2 to 3 colors just kind of swirled around each other. I turned one round just to give you an idea of the character and what it would look like as you turn it down. Well, that's it. Basic color casting in a nutshell. It's not hard. You've seen how quick I did it. There's a whole lot of ways to manipulate our characteristics on our color cast blanks, whether we change the ratio of colors, we add more, we change how we pour them, we pour through something, over something. There's a whole lot of things we can do to change our blanks to make them unique, one of a kind, and different from what everybody else is doing. So if you liked what you've seen, be sure to subscribe and stop back for more videos. I'll be sharing more techniques and ideas from my shop, hopefully to yours. I'm John. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.